Welcome back to ThinkTech. We're talking about drugs today on American Issues Take Two, and keeping the world company this time. We're going to talk about an extension of our discussion yesterday, which was about drugs on a national basis. Now we're going to talk about international basis, the drug trade, and how that arises, how it's being managed, and what are we going to do about it. We'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and we have today Tim Apicella, our co-host, Jeffrey Portnoy, our esteemed guest, and Stephanie Stoll-Dalton, who just came back with us after a little trip.
What?
Okay, we're going to talk about, the global effect of drugs. And, it struck me that we have so much mishigas in Washington, and we deal with, stepping on our own shoelaces all day, that we really, guns, abortion, which is really religion, voting rights, gender equality, social equality, the safety net. Are we paying attention to the real issues affecting the country and the world, trying to make a better life for our citizens, and to the extent we can, make a better life for people everywhere? It's biblical because, we're falling into it. We're not doing what we need to do. The UN is failing. We can't do anything about Ukraine. Doesn't have the funding, to deal with global starvation, human rights, health, and security. Bottom line is we are really incredibly cruel to the disadvantaged, and that ultimately means all of us. It reminds me of Ai Weiwei's movie called Human Flow, where he talks about the fact that there are 70 million people around the world who are in camps, living and dying in camps, without any prospect of liberation or freedom or health or security. The cemeteries, so to say, are in the camps. They're still there. Those people are still there. What are we doing for them? And then there's one issue at the intersection of all of these things. Drugs, hard drugs, addictive drugs that steal your brain. They're part of our human weakness, our vulnerability, our frailty. We are victims of our own mammalian biology, especially in the day of high-tech biology. Remember Brave New World, Aldous Huxley's classic, from 1931, and Soma, the high-tech and ubiquitous drug that mollified you and society, that made you feel good no matter how bad things were. A drug that robbed you and stole your free will, your mind, your memory, your humanity. So that's what we have in a world of high-tech now. And we should examine, how this is affecting not only the U.S., but the world in general, and what the world in general is doing about it. Tim Apicella, you go first. What are your thoughts about the ubiquityness of the drugs that we don't cover, that nobody reports on? The problem that they're everywhere, and they're increasing everywhere.
Is there any time left? Is there any time left to show?
There's sometimes, Jeff.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure.
I will be brief. I will be brief so that Jake can ask you the next question.
No, not you. No, I thought it was over after that introduction. I'm sorry.
Did I mention that Jeff Portnoy is with us? Maybe I forgot to do that.
I also have another question. Are you going to define mishigas?
Yes, craziness.
Yes.
It's a great word for Scrabble, by the way.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I can only spell it. Okay. So let's look at the 4-5 countries that are the highest ranked in drug usage. Iran, Afghanistan, no surprise to me, Russia, and no surprise to me, USA, and then the United Kingdom. What do they all have in common? A dreary existence sometimes for its inhabitants. Why do people use drugs? To escape their dreary existence. I could particularly think Russia would be quite dreary. And not only do they have one of the highest drug use, they also have the highest rates of alcoholism. So to answer your question, Jay, those are the top 5. And unfortunately, the United States is part of it. Why people use drugs is they can't cope with the stress of everyday life. They're bored. Their lives are dreary. So drugs is a form of escapism. Obviously, a lot of drugs, though, like cannabis, has some medical purpose, and that's useful. But by and large, it's all about escapism.
Yeah. So, Jeff, you just came back from Willie Nelson. And, music is, we talked about this yesterday, music is a kind of exception at least for marijuana anyway, where it's okay, no matter what standard you apply, music and soft drugs like that seem to go together no matter what we do. How was the concert really at 90?
Well, the concert was 2 nights. It was phenomenal at the Hollywood Bowl. 2 nights combined, almost 8 hours worth of music. But speaking of drugs, there were 17,000 people in the Hollywood Bowl each night. My guess is about 16,500 were actively imbibing of drugs during the concert. At least I could tell you, everyone I could see from my seat was not shy about following Willie Nelson's advice about marijuana. So, it's all over the place. And it's really a hard discussion because drug term is so ubiquitous, whatever the definition of that is. I mean, alcohol or drugs, are we talking about alcohol and, talking about marijuana, cocaine? Are we talking about fentanyl? I mean, it's very hard to lump it into one bowl because they're all different. They all have different effects. Some are more deadly than others. And so, I think it's really hard just to kind of talk about drugs because, first of all, you got to talk about alcohol and that problem, which I assume when they rank a country like Russia or Iran, I doubt whether they're talking about fentanyl. I just do. You're probably talking about alcohol. And so it's hard. I mean, in the United States, I think it's divided as to what drugs people are taking. You read Hillbilly Elegy and, how much drugs have taken over the country, particularly from the Alleghenies to the Rockies, places like West Virginia, where people were on painkillers. We all know about the opioid epidemic, which
we know this happens in the U.S. for sure. We are our own victim of high technology.
Well, yeah, I'm not so sure. I mean, England is another.
I'm asking about the world. I'm asking about including
the world,
disadvantaged third world developing countries.
I don't think there's much drug use in Singapore, so it's hard to talk about the world.
Well, Singapore is really special. You want to do that in Singapore, and you will not see the light of day. But I think looking at the maps that have been reported over the last couple of years, there's drug trade everywhere, moving everywhere, not only into the U.S., which is a big destination, but all around the world in terms of manufacture, in terms of, smuggling, in terms of, finding new markets. It's a business of billions and billions and billions. And query is any...
But how is that much different than, when the mafia controlled the heroin, drug trade and, when heroin was the drug that everyone was
let me put that to Stephanie. How is it different from the good old bad days when you got hooked on heroin and you were a victim of heroin for the rest of your life? How does OxyContin, I don't know if that's really a part of this array of drugs, but more like fentanyl, amphetamines, the high-tech drugs that you can make in your backyard. How is it different now?
Well, yeah. I think that times have changed. Access, knowledge, knowing about these drugs has all changed. But the most, the biggest drug for the whole world is caffeine. Everybody's hooked on caffeine. That is number one. And then after that, as a legal drug, that is
we're not talking about caffeine today because it is ubiquitous in every country.
I'm just putting it.
Look at Tim; he's actually drinking it right now.
Well, yeah, me too. But the amphetamines are the ones that are most used. But a lot of this chemistry wasn't available to people. What people didn't know about it, and it was all. But in the 30s, there was lots of concern about addiction during the pre-war era and during that time. But I'm not
talking about the difference between the 30s and now. I'm talking about the difference between like 5 years ago and now.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's continuing to increase. In fact, they just made legal the drug that will reverse the effects. I just heard that on the radio. They just passed it. It's okay. You can buy it now at the drugstore. The thing that we should all carry around so we can help people that are dying of fentanyl. We can give them this shot and then
Narcan.
Narcan. It's legal as of today. It's legal to have Narcan. So that's a panacea for the drug addiction. I think people are walking around thinking they can be saved. It's not a problem. They're going to get to the hospital. There's a lot of that, but no, it's dreadfully increasing. And then I wanted the other point is this family that gave us OxyContin has not been sufficiently chastised. And many people have been addicted to that without even knowing it, even after one use. So just if we take the OxyContin with the millions that have been affected by that, over the last 5 years, that's a tragedy and growing. So there are a lot of things piling into.
Well, we talked about the war against drugs back in Ronald Reagan's day. But has the war been successful, Tim? How has it failed? And I don't mean only the U.S. I mean, globally, because there are people selling drugs everywhere. You think Jeff is the only one who goes to a concert and have 90% of the people around him smoking and taking various other drugs. No, it's everywhere. And the question is whether there are institutional organizations and efforts around the world that are actually doing a war on drugs. And I haven't heard them. Maybe you have.
Well, the war on drugs is a dismal failure, and I think it actually started with Richard Nixon. But let's look at all the all the ill effects of trying to crack down on drugs. Look at the penal system and the billions of dollars that's been funneled into that, and let's look at crime and habitual crime as a result of people being incarcerated. They went in with a drug use, and they came out as expert criminals. The list goes on. We got poverty as a result of drugs. It touches every area of society. So
don't forget the cartels in Mexico, in which there are drug lords worth billions, and which have no compunction about killing dozens of people at a time to make their point.
Absolutely, and that's one of the effects of illicit drugs that are illegal. So you have a cartel to manufacture, smuggle, and distribute. But, do we become a Netherlands? Does every country just say yes to everything and decriminalize and treat it as like alcoholism? Or do they, go like the world of Malaysia, where, if we catch you, it's a death penalty?
We got to put that question to Jeff. Jeff, which way do we go? Death penalty or the Netherlands?
Who knows? I mean,
okay.
It's an impossible question to answer because there are so many aspects to it. I mean, it'd be crazy to say one or the other. I mean, the real issue is, why do people take drugs? That's the real issue.
They get habituated, and they get habituated because they're human beings and they're mammals.
No, but they don't.
And it's a biochemistry.
Nobody, except in extreme circumstances, forces someone to start on drugs. And then
I put it this way, and I think Tim made a good point. We live in a very stressful society.
Well, that's exactly right. And so suicide rates are way up. Depression. I mean, you read the statistics on how many young adults under 25 are allegedly clinically suffering from depression. It gets worse in high school, young girls. The rate's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And, and I'm not sure where it stems from, or frankly, whether it's worse or whether we've just become like Little League moms. Everybody gets a trophy. So anybody that goes home and cries at the end of the day because they got a D on a test is now clinically depressed. You know what I mean? I mean, it's such a convoluted and complicated issue.
Well, let me ask you what happens? What happens to a community, a society, a country, a world?
They vote for Donald
where
Trump.
Everybody is taking something, where nobody is in his right mind, where everyone is depressed. Where everyone is needy for biochemical assistance. what kind of a world do we have?
We have the same world we have now. It's the world we're living in. I mean, it's the world we're living in. Look, I brought up Singapore. They have decided they have an absolute no tolerance policy, and they enforce it. And apparently, they haven't gone into the sea. It's one of the most productive nations in the world. Now, how many of their citizens are clinically depressed because they can't get a joint? I don't know.
Nobody. I just came back from Singapore.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful, as you say, a very productive place.
I don't like it at all. It's like anyway. And then you look at the Netherlands, and everybody seems to be happy because they're high 90% of the time. So I don't know. I mean, it's you've raised a topic that is just so multifaceted that it's so difficult to kind of define. But yes, is it worse? Yes. Is it brand new? Never heard of before? No. Is it easier now because you can manufacture these drugs artificially? You don't have to grow the poppy seeds throughout Afghanistan and Pakistan and places like that? Yeah. But is it a lot different than I said when the mafia controlled heroin in Harlem and in big cities in the 30s and 40s and 50s? I don't know.
Well, there are always going to be bad guys making and trading drugs.
Of course.
It draws criminal activity, and the criminals make a lot of money.
That's it. It's very profitable. But is it a lot different than the alcohol industry?
Well, I think the biggest question is, where is it going, Stephanie? Is it the same as it was? Is it going to be worse? Is it getting worse? And if it gets worse, what effect does it have, not only on the U.S., but other countries?
Well, obviously, we need more data about, is it better or worse than it was 5 years ago, and where's it going? But I think another part of this area that's untouched, basically, I guess there is research, but there's so many myths about these products or these ingredients or these whatever they are, drugs. Anyway, but the whole debate over what is a gateway drug and what isn't. In other words, that's one of the marijuana problems, is that's considered gateway. And then you take that, well, hey, you're going to be a heroin addict in 6 months. So what about those myths? What about those features of these particular drugs are taking it to worse?
Yeah.
Can't we know more about this?
Yeah, we covered this yesterday in Take One. And I want to ask Tim to opine on the gateway issue and also the secondary gateway issue. In other words, if I'm taking amphetamines, how likely am I to try fentanyl? Does a successful experience with one of these hard drugs, one of these high-tech drugs, lead you to take others?
Well, the argument of cannabis being a gateway drug is hooey. Forget about it. Those have been debunked time and time again, those suggestions and those studies. Now, when you talk about amphetamines, that could certainly be a springboard to a whole cornucopia of other hard addictive drugs. I mean, amphetamines in themselves are addictive. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have that issue with cannabis, though. I just don't. And I would decriminalize. I would encourage revenue for each 50 states of the United States and every country in the world if they want to tax cannabis, because it's relatively a harmless drug.
Hey, would you apply the same approach to other hard drugs?
Absolutely not.
Harder drugs.
Absolutely not. But if you look at the industries that grow up around,
or the Netherlands side,
yeah, I would say no. I mean, there's got to be a line somewhere. But you look at the criminalization and the cost of to criminalize individuals that take cocaine or whatever the drug is. It's an immense cost to society. And of course, with all that goes the cost of crime and the cost of, dealing with the cartels and the cost of law enforcement to put down the cartels. And, it's so maybe the Netherlands does have it right. I don't necessarily agree with their approach to every drug, but I certainly do when it comes to cannabis. And I think a lot of depression could be assisted with cannabis. And I just think it's a harmless drug. Less harmless than alcohol. You never see people get in brawls and fights and murder under the influence of cannabis, but you sure do when they're under the influence of alcohol.
That's really an important distinction, you know. So Jeff, I mean, would you? I guess you would, but I'd like to hear your view on it. Would you make cannabis recreational? And if you did that, you certainly don't have violence, as Tim says, but you might have violence with some of these other harder drugs. So what would you do with them?
Well, the first part of your question is yes, and everybody is. The only people that aren't is the federal government. So, I mean, state by state by state by state is making it legal in certain amounts. Should have been done a long time ago. I mean, look, I'm somebody that only had caffeine once in their entire life. Once. So I'm not the right person.
Sometimes I think that shows, you know.
I just go through life really depressed, and that's just the way it is. But I don't want to get into other personal traits, but I'm not good as far as why people do these things. But I guess if you're unemployed and you're living in a 1-bedroom, broken down log cabin in North Dakota, and you've got 7 kids and your farmland has gone through a drought, you're going to get whatever thing you can to make you forget what's all around you. That's what it's all about.
Well, the same applies in Siberia.
Well, yeah, but I'm just using America.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what goes on in other places.
Well, they drink vodka.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
I just want to ask, why don't we know some of these things? Like, we know OxyContin is immediately addictive, or very shortly.
No, that's not true.
But
that's no way, because it's not true. I've dealt with this in multiple cases, not on the criminal side, but in the medical malpractice side or whatever. I don't claim to be an expert. Yes, it can be addictive, and it's a physician's fault as well as the fault of the patient. So, it's not just a person. If the doctor will fill your prescription indiscriminately, despite rules that say you have to go through certain things before you can even prescribe it and then re-prescribe it. But, if you take OxyContin because you have been in terrible pain.
Yes.
What's the big, that's it. Now, at some point, you got to decide as a physician, cut them off.
Exactly.
But the industry is so large. And of course, now, as you mentioned, Stephanie, you don't have to get it from a physician. You can get it on the corner of Bishop and King.
Right.
Or maybe a little further into Chinatown.
Well, this goes to an issue we were discussing in the last show just today, about whether the public is aware of tax policy issues which failed in this legislature here in Hawaii, or they should be better informed. And the Speaker of the House said, well, it's very complicated. Well, how complicated is it really when it affects your pocketbook? You should know. And in the case of drugs, we should know what one does and what the other one does, and how they are affecting our community.
People don't care.
They gotta care. It affects them.
You think the person who's addicted in West Virginia and knows where to find it on a daily basis or a weekly basis, whether it's in the corner, on the street, or from a doctor who doesn't care because they're making a fortune, you don't think they either, one, don't know what the long-term effect is, or don't care because they take it today and whatever it is they think are bothering them is gone for 4 hours.
That's a terrible process and outcome.
Yeah, it is, but it's the reality.
It's the reality. Yeah. So Tim, what do we do about this? Because we have all agreed it's increasing, and that's what the literature says. It's increasing to more places in the world. The drugs are more powerful. The drugs are more habituating.
Because the world is
cheaper.
The world is sad. It is.
Where does sad go?
Country after country after. If we had that answer, I could be the Wizard of Oz.
No, Tim has the answer.
I do have the answer. Of course I do. Dump your cell phone. Get rid of it. That's the answer. People are sad because they're hooked and addicted to the cell phone. They're isolated. As societies go around the world, we're becoming more and more isolated. And we're mammals. Jay, you said it perfectly. We're mammals. What do mammals need? They need community. That's just the way mammals are. And those things that separate us and isolate us will ultimately lead to despair, depression. And how do you get yourself out of the barrel of depression? Smoke up, light up, snort up. That's what we do.
Well, I think it leads, as Jeff pointed out, marijuana doesn't lead to violence, but these other things do.
Oh, Tim said that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, do you agree or disagree with that? Jeff?
Well, that's always been the thing about marijuana. When you're high, you're laughing and having a great time. I've seen a lot of depressed people with marijuana, but I'm not,
Okay, well, I want to tell
Let
you.
me speak from experience.
Wait, I just want to say one more thing. Yeah, I can. So, but I want to say we just have a much more permissive society.
Permissive with the Republicans?
Yes, I'm talking about parental permissiveness.
Those
it's
are the
kind of
people-
like anything that makes you happy, my darling child, is
Well,
fine, right? That's the society we live in now.
With high school, with adolescent children, you're up the creek here, no
Yeah,
parent.
no,
Because
I
you
agree.
don't know this whole gateway thing, you're dismissing it, but what is the outcome? And I mean, they're proponents for marijuana like you and like Bill Maher and those people. But the fact of the matter is the only one we know about that I stick with is alcohol. Okay. We know a lot about alcohol and how it affects the mammal. Okay. Or the whatever country, whatever it is. We've got global data on this. We know that some people get hit by it, some people don't, some people recover, some don't. Anyway, so I want to know why it is that is not made clear about what we know about alcohol, and then relate all the rest of the stuff to that. And I think
they did that. They did that in the 1930s. I think that didn't work too well.
No, it didn't work very well.
in the 1930s, that's Coca-Cola was cocaine. That's why it's called Coca-Cola. So they didn't think that one was
Yeah.
FDA got in the act. But that,
Yeah, I love that. I love that story about Coca-Cola and cocaine.
Yeah.
I've yet to see any proof. But it's
There we go, asking
a
for proof.
great wives' tale. I'm not saying it's not true, by the way, that, when Coca-Cola first came about, that there was
cocaine in it. Yes.
But there's no cocaine in it anymore. There's just enough caffeine to kill you.
That's right. It's got the caffeine to kill you, but the cocaine was there for medicinal effects, so they could sell it, in snake oil, and it would have an effect on people. But here's the other thing, gin. Don't you remember the whole Irish nation was going to go, totally off the edge because they're all drinking gin? I mean, and it also
What else are you going to do with the
That's
potatoes?
sacred medicine. Knock it off, Stephanie.
It was mother's. There was a term about gin because all the women were drinking gin, but all day long.
Hey,
Gin makes you sin.
The irony in all this is the alcohol industry, and I'm including restaurants and bars, is a $1 billion industry. Walk in any city, and walk by. I don't care if it's in the worst part of town or the most expensive part of town. The bars are packed from 4 p.m. until they're forced to close. So people can talk all they want about other drugs. That's where most people are getting their drug,
Including
day after day.
the Muslims.
There's a lot of young people that are not particularly interested in, they're interested in that maybe, but to some extent, to a greater extent, they're interested in drugs. I mean, old-fashioned or new-fashioned drugs. And I think things are changing, and that's the point. The reason I selected this topic, which is obviously not
because you need help. It's obvious you need help.
I need help. I'm a little depressed, and this helps me.
That's right. This is your drug.
This is this exactly, Jeff. So, but I'd like to ask you guys to deal with the issue of what happens going forward. We know that alcohol doesn't necessarily have a good effect on people, and talk about health and liver and whatnot. These drugs also, and Stephanie says we don't know the effects of fentanyl long term. We know that you can die from it, but we don't know what the numbers are and the biological processes are and the
there's
medicine.
another point. But there's another point, is because it's only alcohol that's regulated so that you know what you're getting. You know, when it says 16% on that wine bottle, that's what it is. You know that it's 40 with vodka. What do you know with fentanyl?
Well, we talked yesterday about THC and marijuana, right? You have to know how much THC is in the marijuana. So anyway, I'm talking about trying to make people aware, not only here but everywhere, and B, trying to regulate the way we have in terms of alcohol. So let's take a final round here, because we're almost out of time for Jeff. He got 27 clients in this waiting room. I know he does. Was they at the concert? Never mind. Okay, Tim, you first.
Okay, well, I distinctly remember in 5th grade, we spent many, many weeks, if not longer, on drug education. And guess what? It worked. Most of us said, that's something we should steer away from. Or if we experiment with it, let's not make it a habit, literally. So education at a young age is paramount. And let's include alcohol in that education, because it wasn't included when I was in 5th grade. So bottom line is, they're all drugs. And let's talk about the effects, which ones are going to kill you right off the bat, and which ones will make you addicted and make your life even worse, and your family's life worse. So it's all about education.
What about Soma? The one in the book.
What about it?
And what about something that helps you feel good? A prescription medicine that the psychiatrist would give you.
Friendships. Relationships. That'll make you feel good.
You heard that. Okay, Stephanie, your turn. What are your closing remarks about all this?
Well, I wanted to just make sure everybody understands that nobody knows what's in any of these pills. And that's one of the things that once I found out about that makes a big difference. You have no idea what's in that pill if it's not regulated. The only thing, or whatever they're handing you, including the marijuana, you don't know where it came from. You don't know what they've mixed it with. You don't know if it is going to kill you. Anything can kill you if it's got poison in it. Okay. Which is why people are dying from these drugs. They're not necessarily deadly, as you all point out, or maybe they're not even that addictive. But, when they're all screwed up, because people are making them at home, like during Prohibition, they were making the booze in the bathtub. What was in that? That'll kill you. So anyway, my point is the alcohol, we've worked on it. We've got laws about it. We've prohibited, we've encouraged it. And we need to educate on that. And we need to understand that all humans do these things for 100,000 years. And there's a lot of information that's out there that we need to capture and make clear about what chances you're taking and what our government needs to do to prohibit you from being unnecessarily poisoned by trying to have.
Okay, Jeff, that's a perfect setup for your closing remarks, because I know you have some profound points to give us.
All I know is after this show, I'm going to take a drug. That's the only thing. The only thing I've learned.
Take a drug before the show.
No, after. I wasn't depressed till the show started.
Get some caffeine. Hey, Jeff, have some caffeine. It couldn't be better.
Listen. We're in a much more obvious drug culture. You're not talking about America. I know you don't want to, but just listen to the music. Certain segments of society are bombarded with how great drugs are. But I don't think it's limited. As I said earlier, bars you can find in the poorest section of town and in the most expensive sections of town. I think it's impossible just to define drugs because it ranges from aspirin to fentanyl and worse. And so I just think it's an impossible problem. First of all, you make something illegal, people want to try it. It makes them feel better, makes them feel good. And until you get to the reasons why they need them, you're going to go nowhere. And you can try to make it illegal, and all you're going to do is drive up the price and fill up your prisons. And so it's clear the politicians are not the ones who can figure out what to do.
Yeah. Well, we've already.
Okay. Oh, well, I guess I'm with you, Jeff. I am with you in one profound point.
We're going to have a drug when the show's over?
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
going to have a drink.
Maybe we should all. Thank you, Tim. Tim Apicella, Stephanie Stoll-Dalton, and of course, Jeffrey Portnoy. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation that went virtually, as intended, all over the map.
We didn't even look at the map, Jay. We needed to
Aloha.
look at the map. Oh.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.